Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this Saturday we have Bioship Paladin, a classic arcade title with some unique mechanics. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer UPL, Bioship Paladin released to arcades in 1990. It would receive a near-arcade perfect port to the Sega Mega Drive, the Sega Genesis, a year later. Now fast forward to current, and it's available as an arcade archives title courtesy of Hamster on the PlayStation 4 and the Nintendo Switch. Now this is yet another one of those really fun, obscure arcade titles that Hamster's dug up for their arcade archive collection, and I gotta say I really appreciate seeing yet another excellent arcade title brought to modern platforms. This one is a lot of fun because it has some interesting mechanics that I haven't really seen in other shoot 'em ups. I want to say that there's others out there like that, but I can't say for certain. So you'll see those mechanics here in a little bit, but just based off those alone, this one I feel is worth a look. Here we find ourselves at the main Arcade Archives menu. As usual, we have a few different modes we can play the game in. There is the original English ROM, the Bioship Paladin, as well as the Japanese version, Uchu Senkan Gomora. So the titles were different between the two versions. I'm not sure why they changed them. Maybe the English distributors felt like Bioship Paladin sounded better than Space Battleship Gomora. You also have the high score mode, which is setting as high a score as possible in one continue, and the caravan mode as high of a score as possible in 5 minutes. Starting the game, you do have this brief little control scheme here. One thing I don't think I mention often enough is the manuals that Hamster provides in the games are usually quite detailed, and really one of the highlights I have for the Arcade Archive collection. The one for Bioship Paladin's not as good, but most of the time there's quite a bit of quality there. So putting machines into, or rather credits into the machines, you see here that you can play one player or two player. It is two player simultaneous, so that's the way we're going to show you the game today. Starting the game, round 1, start. So we have our interestingly shaped Battleship Paladin, and in addition you can see that there's an interesting little reticule that follows our two ships. So we have two main weapons. Your main cannon, which it is possible to charge up, and the charge shot deals a decent amount of damage, but I feel like there's a better overall weapon, and that's your beam. So that's where the reticule comes into play. So while you're firing, you can press your beam button, and there is an interesting mechanic where your ship stops moving, but you're firing this really powerful beam shot that can go anywhere around like your ship. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of like you're turning yourself into a turret, a la something along the lines of, say, like a Missile Command. And the shot that we fire, if the beam deals more damage than our main cannon, and in addition to that, it also will cancel out enemy bullets. So it's a way to kind of increase the longevity. So there's some different power-ups that we can get. I just picked up an A, which is kind of an interesting one. It basically turns on your turret, the beam rather, into this auto mode where even if you're firing your normal shot, for 20 seconds it will still like move around the screen firing the beam at any particular enemies. So there's another power-up that we've been picking up that's worth talking about. That's the L power-up, which basically stands for life. So this game has both a life system as well as a health system. So when we pick up like the L's, we increase our health, which are displayed there at the bottom of the screen. So we can actually take several hits before we die if it's just like normal enemy shots. But in addition to that, there's another really unique element to the gameplay itself, and that's the life system causes us to increase in size. So we're now like two stages. So you've got like one size of the red, one size in the orange, and one size in the yellow. So we're at our largest size now, and if we take enough damage, then we'll drop down from the size that we were at to the next lower sides. It's a really unique mechanic that is kind of surprising, and it's like you get used to it amazingly fast. It's one of those things where you wouldn't expect it, but you do. And they're like last kind of power up that we haven't talked about yet are the Techno Volleyballs. So they're basically those like round orbs that you can see on the Player 2 ship. They act as options or drones, and you can equip up to 6 of them above and below your ship. So they'll like both absorb shots as well as fire like lightning bolts, providing additional damage when you're using your normal shot, not when you're using the beam shot. One thing that's interesting to note is the game transitions are really sudden. And one thing that this game does have that we like fortunately stage 1 like doesn't really have a problem with, but some of the later stages do, is you've got issues with rather rapidly blinking screens when you defeat most stage bosses. So that's something to keep in mind. If you've got problems with photosensitivity and flashing screens, then I would probably recommend not watching all the way to the end of the second stage, as that's where we would first encounter that. So here we come across these enemies here, and one of the things that I think is kind of neat about the whole turret system is there's a certain amount of like strategic placement with where you would put yourself. There's less of that in a two-player game, as you can kind of have one player act as like a turret, the other player kind of cover that particular ship. But where you can race enemy bullets, like you can kind of like work at it yourself. But anyway, what I was saying there is there's some unique placement or some unique strategic choices with where you place yourself in relation to some enemies. As there are enemies that can only fire in certain positions in front, and if you happen to be in front or behind that enemy ship, they won't be able to target you. So there's some neat choices there where you have to maybe destroy some turrets on the enemies and then move to a different position, and bam, you can continue fighting the enemy ship that you're targeting without taking damage. But that said, those same enemy ships are actually rather brutal with their aim, and if you are above or below them, then you'll be targeted relentlessly until you move to a safe spot around the ship itself. So here we find ourselves at the second stage boss. So one of the things I really do like about all the various boss fights is you've got the really excellent mech design present there, but all the bosses have kind of this multi-stage fight where you've got all these all these turrets on the enemy ship, and then as you destroy those turrets, the fight itself kind of changes into a different kind of fight, as the ship no longer has its turrets, so it's going to try and ram you or use a different kind of missile pattern or something like that. I just appreciate that the gameplay evolves throughout the course of your play. And that basically is Bioship Paladin served up for your enjoyment. It's definitely one that I'm happy to have had the opportunity to play. It's not without its faults though. The mechanic itself can be a little bit finicky, and well, just the fact that the turret itself is or rather the beam itself is so powerful compared to your main shot, you'll get some situations where it's why bother moving? In addition to that, there's this weird mechanic where sometimes the life power-ups in particular will move away from you when you get close to them without... So if you're shooting it and it's changing form, I get that. But otherwise, just moving away from you almost to spite you, it's I don't really appreciate that kind of a mechanic too much. It's almost like you have to sneak up on the power-ups. So as far as minus flavors, there's that little complaint with the way that the power-ups sometimes move. In addition to that, the suddenness of the stage transitions, you'll defeat a boss and then suddenly, bam, you're in the next stage, and it's round 3 start, etc., etc. It's just it would have been nice if there was just a little bit of time between the sections to acknowledge that. And then some of the bosses like do have a little bit of an unfairness to them. Specifically, the final boss in particular. Like you need to kite around, and if you lose your speed power-ups that we can collect from getting the S power-ups, then it's actually very difficult to move around the boss fast enough to properly kite it. So there's just some unfairness with boss movement and enemy placement, and well, how like crazy sniper, like amazing sniper some of the enemies can be. But I do realize that's kind of like par and partial for some of the mechanics that are present in the gameplay itself. But on the plus flavor, I do really like the life system and just the silliness of having your ship get larger throughout the course of gameplay. Then we also have the awesome beam system, where we just turn our ship into a turret, and it's not always going to work because you have enemies like this that has like a nice, like a huge like beam weapon that it fires at us. But most of the time we can kind of get away with like acting as a bit of a turret. And then there's just those unique enemy designs that I think really add a lot of unique flavor to this particular shoot 'em up. One that, as I mentioned earlier, I'm really happy to have had the chance to play. So this one that, if you're interested in these arcade archives, is one I can like recommend you pick up and give a try. Alright, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining us this week. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next week.